Hey, Year 12s. How you going? Feeling pumped for a week of study ahead of you? I hope you're feeling pumped. Um, we're glad that we're able to do something for Year 12s to help you know that you're loved and that we care for you and that we want to be here to support you in whichever way possible. It's a pleasure to get to do these devotionals for you, and I hope that they're of use to you in kind of helping you to fix your eyes on Jesus in this time. That's ultimately the goal of these devotions. We want to help you to fix your eyes on Jesus at this time. And since that is the goal, we've chosen the book of Hebrews. Hebrews is a book in the New Testament. It's written by an unknown author. Could have been a man or a woman. I don't know. It was somebody who we don't know who it was. It's probably actually not a book, but a sermon that was written down. And it sounds like a sermon as you read through it. And it's written to a group of Christians who have become Christians from a Jewish background. And so these Christians are facing hardship and they're facing persecution because they are Christians, probably from the Emperor Nero, if there's any ancient history buffs out there. So because they're facing hardship, they're actually thinking of ditching Christianity and reverting back to Judaism, because in the ancient world, Judaism was safe and protected. They didn't get persecuted, whereas Christians did. And the point of this sermon, this letter that we're reading, is to encourage those Christians not to give up on Jesus. The author of this book will say numerous times that Jesus is so much better than the old way of things. He's so much better than the other options that are out there. And this is actually why I want to focus on this book for the devotionals, because it's a book about persevering, about pushing through, about grit, keeping going. And in so many ways, this last year has been really hard. For you guys, it's been difficult as you've kind of come to the end of your schooling era, the 13 years that you've spent there, and it's been anticlimactic, I guess. Like you haven't been able to celebrate with your friends. A lot of your coming of age events have been put on ice and aren't able to happen. And you might feel as if you lack the perseverance, the grit, the push to keep going. And I think that this can bleed into your faith as well. As things become all too much, and as church meets online and Bible study meets online and conferences and weekends away and camps and all of those sorts of things have been put on hold, you might just, like the people who this book was written to, you might feel like it's too much, feel like throwing in the towel. Maybe you think everything's going wrong, it's all too much, I'm just going to put the faith thing on the back burner for the moment. Just one less thing to worry about. And I want to encourage you through the devotionals that it's you're putting the best thing to the side if you're doing that, because the book Hebrews is about Jesus being better. Jesus is worth hanging around for. And I personally have found that in all my own personal crises of faith, the answer for me is to look back to Jesus. Even though I try so many other things, like getting myself sorted and doing more things and being more disciplined, I always find that ultimately the answer is to look back to Jesus and what he has done. And that's exactly what Hebrews seeks to do, to help us to fix our eyes on Jesus, or fix our thoughts on Jesus. Pay careful attention to Jesus, to borrow the words of the author of Hebrews. Because Jesus is superior to anything else that there is out there. That's actually the way that the sermon starts, and that's the idea that keeps coming up again and again. Verse 4 of chapter 1, the author says, "So Jesus became as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs." So again, we get this idea that Jesus is better. He is superior. He is above all else. And in this particular part of the book, Jesus is superior to angels. Now, let's spend a moment thinking about this, because I don't know if you think about angels a lot or if angels are something you've devoted very little attention to. Angels are the first thing that the author of Hebrews wants to say Jesus is better than. So what is the significance of angels? Well, let me give it to you really quickly. In the Old Testament, the main moment that God showed himself to the world and showed what kind of a God he was when Moses came out of Egypt and went up to Mount Sinai to receive the law from God. I'm not sure if you remember this story, but a quick recap. Israel were enslaved in Egypt under Pharaoh, and God raises up Moses to go into Egypt and to deliver them from their slavery. Moses calls down the plagues on Egypt, you probably remember that, and eventually Pharaoh concedes and lets Israel go. They go out of Egypt and they cross through the Red Sea. God parts the Red Sea for them. And then after that, Moses goes up to Mount Sinai, and when he's at Mount Sinai, he receives the Ten Commandments. He receives the law from God. Those of you doing studies of religion and looking at Judaism, you'd be very familiar with this story. Now, these events, they were the main moment in the Old Testament when God showed himself or revealed himself to the world. You might even remember that in this story, God tells Moses his own personal name. He says, don't just call me God, call me Yahweh, which means I am what I am, or I will be what I will be. Basically, it's God revealing himself to the world. He's showing himself to the world. And for most of history, that Mount Sinai event, that kind of giving the law moment, it's been spoken of as being mediated by angels. Let me kind of explain it. So even in the Bible, it's spoken of this way. Paul, when he writes his letter to the Galatians, he talks about this event where God gives the law to Moses. He says the law was given through angels. Because basically the picture is that Moses went up Mount Sinai and that God was up in the heavens and that the angels were the intermediary. They were the ones who were passing the law from God down to Moses in the two tablets, the Ten Commandments. And this is why Jesus is better than the angels. Have a look at the first verses of chapter 1. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. One of those ways is through the angels at Mount Sinai. But in these last days, he says, or she says, the author says, in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. So in the old days, the angels were the intermediary to the old way of things. They were the ones who brought the law from God to Moses. But now we don't have the angels. We have God's own Son who has come as God's revelation of himself. When God wants to show the world what he's like, he doesn't do it through angels anymore. He does it by his own Son. And the Son is pretty special. Have a look at what it says in verse 3. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. So Jesus is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. That phrase, exact representation of his being, it's actually referring to like when you have a stamp and the stamp goes on the page and leaves its mark on the page. It's the exact representation of the stamp. That's what this is referring to. Jesus is the exact representation of God. And we have him as our revelation of God to ourselves. It is as good as God himself showing up. It is God himself showing up. I'll give you an illustration. Apparently this week, they're launching a new iPhone. This is Tuesday, and you're watching this on Monday, so maybe it's already happened. And if it hasn't, I was wrong, and the website, the internet lied to me. How dare it? But the new iPhone is going to be launched. Now, let's say you see this new iPhone and you think, gosh, I really need a new iPhone. And so you order it from the Apple website, and it takes a few weeks for the post to get its act together. But eventually, the postman knocks at your front door and you go and collect your new iPhone from the postman. That's pretty special, isn't it? You get this new iPhone out of its box and you try to work out how to use it and all of its new gadgets and whatever. Now, imagine a different scenario. Imagine that the new iPhone gets launched and you go, gee, I really would love that new iPhone. And so you order it. And then a few days later, doesn't take as long, pretty good, you hear a knock at the door and you think, oh, gee, Australia Post has got its act together. And you go to open the front door. And rather than your regular postman standing there in his working shorts and fluoro vest, you have Tim Cook, who is the CEO of Apple, standing at your front door. And he's holding your new iPhone in his hand, and he says, here's your new phone. Hope you enjoy it. Can I show you how to use it? He comes into your living room, he sits down with you, and he shows you all of the amazing things that the new iPhone is capable of. Now, I don't know if that illustration lands with you or not. It was just the first thing that I thought of. But that's essentially what this is saying about Jesus. Why is he better? Well, because he is God himself coming into our lives to show us who God is, so that through his Son, we can have relationship with God. It's a pretty amazing thing. God enters our lives in a personal way through a real person so that we can have relationship with him. Don't give up on that. Don't give up on that truth. That is so fundamentally better than any other idea that is existing in the world today. That God himself would come and show up on our doorstep to be God's revelation of himself to us. The author of Hebrews will conclude in the same way. He says, or she says, the author says, in chapter 2, verse 1, we must pay the most careful attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. He says, she says, the author says, pay careful attention to Jesus. Fix your thoughts on him. Fix your eyes on him. If you're feeling like giving up, the problem is probably that you've taken your eyes off Jesus. If you pay most careful attention to Jesus, you will see that Jesus is so much better than anything else the world is offering you. And he actually describes, he, she, the author, the person, whatever, describes what it is like as we fade away in faith. He says, pay the most careful attention, therefore, to what you have heard, so that you do not drift away. So that we don't drift away. Because I know we have this tendency to think that if I give up on the faith, it's going to be a decision that I make in a moment. But it's not something that happens in a moment. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not even something that happens in a quick decision or in an instant. It's something that happens over time. It's a drift away. Like a person who's caught in a rip at the beach. They might not initially realize it, but before they know it, it's quick and they're gone. And it's deadly. It's deadly. The drift is deadly. And so we must pay the most careful attention that we are not drifting away. So let me just finish. I just want you to pause and ponder two thoughts as you finish. Firstly, do you feel like you're drifting away? Remember, it only takes a collection of moments after moments after moments. Do you feel like you're drifting away? And if that is the case, how can you pay more careful attention to Jesus? How can you pay more careful attention to Jesus? I want to encourage you to tune in and watch these devotions for the rest of the week. That's one way that you can pay more careful attention to Jesus. Let me pray for you as you begin your study week, and hopefully we'll see you at lunchtime.